Who are you and why are you here? Great questions, right? That's really the basis of what the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, is trying to answer or teach us. Hey, welcome. Pastor Jason here. Going to give a review, kind of a summary, but how many things can I include in such a short amount of time? Talking about the book of Genesis. It's a class that I started teaching in the fall of 2019. Can you believe it? This is, right now I'm recording this in February of 2021. Little interruption from a pandemic, all these things, right? So I'm totally virtual right now instead of in person with you, where we started at Ashby Ponds Community, our chapel at Lansdowne Woods, and even on Galilee's campus. But I hope that many of you will get something out of this as sort of a comprehensive review, or hitting the highlights, probably is better to say. I also hope some people who are watching, maybe this is all you've seen of my teaching of Genesis, and still I think as a standalone video, you should be able to get something out of it to help you understand and to better read deeply the Word of God, the book of Genesis. It is one of the greatest books ever, one of the greatest books in the entire Bible. I don't take it as, science. It's not written as comprehensive history. It's written, I believe, the Holy Spirit and the people who were the writers in Genesis back in the day. It's about faith. Faith story, meaning it's true. It's not answering every question. It's answering, who am I as a believer? Who are the ancestors of my faith? And what did it mean back then as well as for now? As a prequel, what is that? It's a story that goes before what people of faith have often called even the bigger story, the book of Exodus, or the story of God's deliverance of God's people. And for us as Christians, all of this is a prequel to Jesus Christ, who is our deliverer and delivers us from slavery to sin and death and so on. So this is in that context that I offer it to you. I also want to admit up front that I've had a lot of help, teachers of mine, and certainly I have a few books. Here are my resources. I'm going to just show them to you quickly. You can rewind if you want to write these down. Anyone from a United Methodist tradition, or if you want to have this sort of very well-grounded academic but also open-minded approach to the scriptures, I recommend Adam Hamilton's Making Sense of the Bible. This just helps you have a framework, a basic understanding of how we see the scriptures as Protestants, as United Methodists, as thinking people today who are not opposed to other types of education, whether it be science or a literary background, because God has given us our rational mind. Genesis will show us that. I also want you to know that I didn't have time in this class, certainly not in this video, to get into this part of it, but my knowledge has been informed by studies within science and the medical community, particularly genetics. So think about the root word for Genesis, or what we understand to be the gene or genome. So this is a wonderful read. It's not a faith read as much as it is understanding science and human nature. Genesis, the book, is a lot about human nature. This is a book called The Gene. I'm going to mispronounce the author's name because he's Indian, so apologies. Siddhartha Mukherjee. Wonderful scientist and, a person who cares deeply about people and his own family that struggled with mental illness. And that story of the gene in a medical term, for me, connects with this understanding of who we are as people and why Genesis answers this question from a faith point of view. Why is human nature so frail, broken, as science would say, the human condition? It tends towards a lot of difficulties, and we certainly hear it from a faith point of view. I'll get into that in a minute. But one of the great themes of Genesis is violence is not God's way. So Not in God's Name by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. If you were in my class, you heard me quote that quite often because you'll hear it in this summary. Violence shows up in human history and certainly in the book of Genesis. And God lifts that up as an example. I mean, it's negative, but it's like, don't do this right from the beginning. Again, touching on one other, real quick, touching on the idea of Genesis and genetics and understanding the human as a complete body, mind, and spirit. So from the body and medical background point of view, the language of God. Francis Collins, who is a Christian and served as the leader of the Human Genome Project in National Institutes of Health nearby. So I just think that's a wonderful read if you want to understand more about God's creation of human beings and how complex and that wonderful, beautiful language of God written in the genetic code. So I recommend that. But finally, from a Christian point of view, just a very helpful series, the B series, BE. This man, Dr. Warren Wiersbe, I've used in virtually every Bible study that you may have seen me do. Wiersbe has a short commentary, very easy for the layperson to read and get a lot out of. He stands in the Christian tradition, Protestant tradition, perhaps a little bit further to the right, a bit more conservative fundamental than me, but I love that. I love listening to my brothers and sisters who are a bit more conservative than me. I learn a whole lot, and so some of my quotes through the class had come from Dr. Warren Wiersbe. You hear him show up in my sermons fairly often, so always trying to give credit where credit is due. Let's jump in now to a summary of the book of Genesis. Right at the beginning, I want you to know there's certainly many different ways to understand this book. There are outlines. I gave you a blueprint or a type of outline that I would say is very helpful. If you don't have it, you can always email me and I'll send it to you. I didn't create it, but here's the thing. I think of Genesis, it's 50 chapters long. It's a story after story after story, right? So think of it as sort of helpful to know it is 7 story sequences. You could understand the whole book of Genesis through these chapters collected in 7 subheadings or 7 story sequences. Let me just name them from that blueprint. The first is the story of creation, then the story of Adam and Eve, the story of Noah and his family, the story of Abraham and Sarah and their families, the story of Isaac and Rebekah, the story of Jacob and his families. I'm going to say, he had double wives and, all these kids, 12 sons. And then finally, the story of Joseph. So we just finished that. I have videos. By the time I got to doing all video, you would pretty much have the Joseph sequence of stories all on this YouTube channel. So let's jump in, beginning with the story of creation. One thing I want you to remember always, because it's at the very beginning of the Bible and it's at the very end. God creates, God changes the world, and God will bring everything to consummation or completion, fulfillment, through His spoken word. God speaks everything into being. Now, God creates us in God's image, man and woman, in the image of God, all different types of people around the world, created in the image of God. This is the original blessing. This is so powerful. One way that we're in the image of God is not simply how we look, all right? It's not about that. God gives us intelligible language, that God speaks everything into creation. Language, therefore, functions as a very creative and collaborative effort with God, that we understand God through God's Word, that we can make peace with one another and do great things in this world through the power of words, right? It's our rational mind and it's our free will. All of this means we're in the image of God, and this is the original blessing. You are a child of God, and you can utilize these gifts, like I just named, toward a good relationship with God, or not. And that's what the whole book is really about. Adam and Eve. Next story you get is this sequence of the Adam and Eve family and what goes wrong there. Right from the beginning, it's all paradise in the Garden of Eden until what? Well, God's a relational God and desires us to be in right relationship with Him, that is, respectful and trusting and loving kind of relationship. But we have a free will to make choices, and Adam and Eve did not make a good choice one day. This disobedience breaks the relationship with God. So you have something that Christians call original sin enter the story. Don't need to get into the details. Certainly there is, a serpent involved, and there's some deception. By the way, a lot of times deceptions are like half-truths, because the serpent speaks and says to Adam and Eve, don't eat that because you'll become like God. Wait a minute, before original sin, there was original blessing. There's already a promise that we are in the image of God, and having free will is part of that. Just use it correctly. Anyhow, so they bite. They take the bait. They take the forbidden fruit. So this breaks the relationship with God. Yet God is merciful, shows that mercy, yet God has consequences, and they're expelled from Eden. What I would point to in this, original sin, the value of that doctrine or the understanding of that phrase is that somehow it gets into the bloodstream. Follow me, Genesis, genetics, that kind of thing, broken human nature all the way down from the beginning. We, human beings, have a tendency to choose self first. This is pretty much what the seed or the original break in the genomic sequence there, if you will, is that instead of being good and just wanting to be with God, we are unsettled and choose ourselves first. You might call this ego, E-G-O, edging God out. Ever since the Garden of Eden, we've been trying to edge God out, do it on our own, make poor use of the blessing or the gifts of free will that God has given us. And so we have, through the bloodstream or through our genetics, through our human condition, a brokenness within us that we are trying to fulfill ourselves only with ourselves, and we choose ourselves first over other people and over God. Now, there's a promise in Genesis 3:15, though, that a wounded victor would crush the head of the serpent. This we take from the Christian point of view to be Christ, a promise of Christ there in the very first chapters of the Bible, the cure to the human condition, the one who will, forgive us for the original sin, but also redeem us and restore us to that original blessing where we can choose the right way and follow God's way instead of our own selfish ways. So a little bit of theology wrapped up in that summary of the creation story. Let's move to the story of Cain and Abel, underneath the story of Adam and Eve. It really gets thick here with sibling rivalry. This becomes a recurring theme throughout Genesis, I might say throughout scriptures and all of history. Sibling rivalry, you have to understand, becomes the root problem that ego, seed of disobedience and selfishness, tends for us, even in the closest family relationships or relationships that should otherwise be loving and trusting, it becomes that thing that makes things turn out for the worst. Sibling rivalry is kind of shorthand to tell you that all those faults and foibles of human nature are lurking under the surface. In the Cain and Abel story, worship is assumed. So all through the book of Genesis, having a relationship with God, worshiping God, prayer, practices of faith, all those things are assumed, and you just kind of see little snapshots of it coming to glimpse here, that Cain and Abel worshiped God by giving an offering. So, by the way, offering has always been part of worship life. It just happens to be a financial thing today. Back then it was, what your crops or your livestock gave. Now, the difference between the brothers' offerings was simple, that Cain gave God an offering, like non-specific. Maybe he wasn't doing it wholeheartedly. We don't know. We have to infer. But Abel's offering, God gave favor and blessing because it was of the first fruits. It was significant. It was sacrificial. It was giving God his best. Our best is what God desires and deserves. But Cain fell short there. But what happened was the sibling rivalry, or that seed of ego, pride, within him swelled up, and he became resentful and hateful of his brother. God challenged Cain. God gave him a chance, not to give in to temptation. Gave him some teaching about, don't let your emotions, negative ones, master you. So Cain still premeditated, hated his brother, and that resentment, anger, and hatred spilled over into violence. The first violent act, brother killed brother. Hey, am I my brother's keeper? Again, our tendency with ego is to try to blame the other or get out of the consequences. Now, let me do a little aside here, because the curse of Cain, this does not need to be misread or misinterpreted as something to justify racism. Different parts of the Bible, but certainly right here when Cain receives a mark or a curse from God. This and other places in the Bible are often referred to justify a person today, or throughout history, groups of people, hating a different group of people, or someone because of their race or their ethnicity. That's not in the scriptures. But for me, when human beings do that, we repeat the history of violence in the scriptures. We repeat the brokenness and the sibling rivalry and the hatred and the violence that Cain had for his brother Abel. So just a little caution there. I think that's a big lesson in the book. God challenges Cain, but Cain gives in to temptation. And this theme, I'm going to repeat it, the resentment that builds up into anger, that spills over into hatred and violence. Broken relationships, yes, violence, even murder. It's understood in Genesis. It's repeated over and over. The key to understanding the book is this: God does not desire violence. God desires peace and reconciliation. Violence is not God's way. So whenever in history or even today we see religion and violence going hand in hand, and they are intermingled, so much of history and even our world problems today, that is not God's way. And Genesis teaches us peace and reconciliation, not violence and division and hatred. Although those things run through these stories, right? Because they're trying to show us this as a very significant lesson. So sibling rivalry, it's interesting that God tends to lift up not the conventional wisdom, not the cultural norm of the eldest son being the blessing bearer, but God lifts up the younger. God lifts up the younger son multiple times in these family stories to be the blessing bearer. So God is doing something here, just as when King David is born and is not the oldest son, he's not the one who looks like he should be king. Just as Jesus was born and was not born into a palace or some 8 feet tall, knight in shining armor, great hero-looking guy who's very ordinary. God lifts up the ordinary. So you find that in Genesis. But this theme of sibling rivalry runs through families, even to yours and mine today. The tension and strife in human relationships, we see that in the book of Genesis. That sin and brokenness, ego and violence flow through bloodlines in families. But what Genesis is also saying, because you see a lot of genealogies, the blessing will follow those families where, by the way, through the bloodstream, through the teaching and the sharing in families, people can walk with the Lord and maintain faith and blessing to them and to all. So what is also key in Genesis is this idea of walking with God, living the right way, cultivating a good character, and keeping faith alive. So as much as we see the sin and the strife, it's also this blessing bearing that's going on. So those are some of the highlights for the first couple of sections. Let me turn the page to Noah, the story of Noah and his family. Well, talking about violence. The world was violent, and in Genesis 6, God's response to so much of the world population being violent and not walking in the way of the Lord, there is natural disaster, which, yeah, that's violent. And it's a start over. It's like hitting the reset button. Really crazy, but that's what God does, choosing a family to be the one to bear the blessing and show the way. And so God, after the flood, gives this promise in the rainbow, this covenant: I'm not going to destroy the earth with water again. Water is an image that flows through the scriptures. From the first chapter, there's water present at creation. In the Noah flood story with the ark, water is a rebirth, a recreation. For us as Christians, water of baptism, a rebirth, a new life given through Christ. So you also have this story called the Tower of Babel. And I can't not use this as a highlight. I mean, understand that this tower project, people were getting together, they were collaborating on it, but then they're thrown into difficulty and division. And the peoples of the world seem to spread out again in this sense of different nations, different languages, and so on. A nice bookend to that is Acts chapter 2, where our Christian tradition teaches us the Holy Spirit unites people by understanding their differences, understanding their different languages, and bringing them together in spirit in the name of Jesus Christ. But back at the Tower of Babel, understand that again, it's a symbol of pride. Remember, pride is the seed, the original sin of brokenness that flows through our bloodline. All of human creation, all of us, every type of person, tends toward ego, edging God out, tends toward pride. The Tower of Babel also is the basis for the city Babylon, which is an image and an issue from the book of Genesis all the way through to Revelation. Babylonians, often the enemies of God's people, and it's a symbol, Babylon, even to the book of Revelation it is. Pride, rebellion, violence, just the way to not live, the way that you're not walking with the Lord. Now, the story of Abraham and Sarah and their families. Oh my goodness. Genesis 12 is a very pivotal chapter. It begins with God saying, I will bless you so that you will be a blessing. That's a word for you and I as believers today, as a word for the church. But back then, Abraham and Sarah were virtually like ordinary people, nobodies. They lived in a culture of, polytheism or multiple gods, small g gods, little stone statue type of gods. And they begin this relationship with one God. So monotheists, this is the beginning of three of the world's great religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, all call Abraham and Sarah ancestors of the faith. It's very important, but understand that they developed a relationship with God, and we see it in these little snapshots through those chapters in that story sequence of Abraham, where Abraham is in a prayer life with God, Abraham worships God, Abraham offers sacrifices to God, Abraham welcomes the stranger. I paused on that because I don't want you to miss this theme. This is one of those blessings that is born by people of faith and handed along generation to generation. We should have this within our hearts in our Christian tradition as well, to welcome all kinds of people, to welcome the stranger. Abraham and Sarah then were in the very presence of God, and God's blessing of a child was pronounced through these strangers that they welcomed, gave them hospitality, food and drink in the desert. When we welcome the stranger, we may, in fact, be learning something from God. And this blessing comes, they were late in life, older adults and past childbearing years. And yet God blesses them with sons. The firstborn, by the way, is Ishmael. Interesting, remember, it's not always the firstborn, it's the younger that receives the blessing or becomes the blessing bearer. All the children are blessed. Don't let me miss that point. Ishmael is blessed, but the story of the scriptures kind of doesn't focus on Ishmael, but we know that Ishmael goes on to be like the founder of the Islamic tradition and many nations, right? But the scriptures in Genesis follow the storyline, the blessing bearer of Isaac. Now, Isaac is the younger son. Again, God seems to lift up the younger, or the ones that the world wouldn't have their eyes on, right? Now, there's this weird story. I can't get into it here, but it's the near sacrifice of Isaac, that of all things, God asks Abraham to almost sacrifice his son. One, you might be a little bit like raising your eyebrows and concerned. What kind of God would do this? My quick response is, perhaps this is only right if you consider that God's heart is the God who's willing to actually sacrifice his own son for all the world, for people who don't deserve it. Well, when you look at Abraham, there are many ways that Abraham is not qualified to be this founder of faith. He's very imperfect. And this is one thing I love about God, I love about the book of Genesis. People, even the best that are lifted up in Genesis, people are fallible and sinful and broken and not perfect. You and I don't have to be perfect. Abraham believed God, Genesis 15:6, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. Abraham didn't earn righteousness. He didn't get righteous by following the rituals, getting circumcised and doing the worship rituals and so on. He didn't even sacrifice Isaac, right? But he had a heart to. He had a heart to obey God and to believe God no matter what. He and Sarah waited like 24 years for that child to be born. Oh my goodness. So they prayed and they remained faithful no matter the circumstance. They believed God. Even when they didn't see any evidence of God's blessing, they trusted God. So this is what it is to be a person of faith. Not to be perfect, but as the Bible uses this term in the Old Testament, wholehearted. It's not that he was perfect, but day after day, Abraham and Sarah refused to give up on God. They never quit, and that's what faith means. You just don't quit. They had total commitment, wholeheartedness. And that's a message for us today. Now listen, the story goes to Isaac and Rebekah, right? And it's very little time that is spent on them in Genesis, except that Rebekah has these twins, and they are wrestling even in the womb. They are born Esau first, so the oldest, so to speak, they're twins, and then Jacob. And Jacob is clasping his brother's heel, and they are in a wrestling match for the rest of their lives. And it's, again, kind of a story of faith, story of people of God. It is Jacob, his name. It's a story of a very imperfect person. His name means duplicitous or trickster, somebody you really can't trust. He tricks his brother Esau out of Esau's birthright and blessing. You think, here comes the sibling rivalry, the anger and resentment that's built up is going to be full-blown hatred and then violence. Will there be violence? Will these brothers kill each other? Well, Jacob runs away. And he has to go through his own times of trials. He gets married. He gets married twice. He begins a real relationship with God. He has dreams. He worships God. All these things. Over time, you see this character develop. So one of the things in Genesis is that these characters can transform. People can change. When I mentioned some of these books that I've read at the beginning of this video, I want you to know that that's a theme in our own lives. And whether it's stories of faith or stories of medical science, most people are trying to answer that question. Can people really change? Is it nature or nurture? I'm going to answer all of this to say yes. And this should be part of our journey. Part of the stories of faith in Genesis are very much connected with your story and mine as we learn and live and grow, make mistakes, find ways to be forgiven and to forgive others, to reconcile and to understand God and try to live at peace with God. So this is what's going on in all these different characters' lives. It's really powerful. Jacob changes. You don't think he can change, but he does. And he doesn't always stay changed. That's the thing, like Abraham. He lived really well, and then he backslid, if you want to use that word, or he failed, or he lied, or all these different things. And not perfect, but wholehearted. So Jacob becomes this person of faith, a wholehearted person of faith. He wrestles with an angel. So first he wrestles with his brother. He wrestles with himself, his own character or his failings. And he comes to terms with God. He wrestles with this presence of God. Angel is what we say, although the scripture, that's not the word in the scripture, that's how we understand the story. The very presence of God in this man or angel at the river. And after that, Jacob, well, you could say God changed him, God touched him. He never walked the same. Oh yeah, God touched him, he was changed. He had a limp because his hip was out of joint from that all-night wrestling match. But the point is, transformation comes at a personal price. We have to go through some things, and we may never be the same, and some of that includes some pain and some scars. But God worked something powerful there, that Jacob, having faced his fears, faced his faith wrestling match with God, he receives this new name and an empowerment to see his brother. And will there be violence? Every indication says Esau is on his way with an army to finally have it out with his brother Jacob, who deserves it, by the way. But the thing is, let me go to the name change first. God calls Jacob Israel. This is the first occurrence of that word in the wrestling match with Jacob and the angel at the river. The name or the word Israel literally means those who wrestle with God and don't give up. So the people of God, so today we understand as Christians, the church is like a new Israel. So we also bear an identity, a connection here. Remember, this whole book is who are you and why are you here? What's your purpose in this world? So the name Israel is to have faith. You're not going to totally understand God. By goodness, this book, Genesis, gives you a lot, but it often raises more questions. So it doesn't explain everything about God, but it invites us to be those kind of people who will live in a faith relationship with God that is sometimes blessing, sometimes we bring our own curse into it, the original sin and the pride and everything, and it's a wrestling match trying to understand. We look at the world today and we've got a lot of questions like, why? Why would that happen? Why do we have to endure this stuff? And particularly when it's questions of life and death, we tend to question God. Stay in that wrestling match. Don't quit. That's what it means to be people of faith. It doesn't mean you got it all figured out. Doesn't mean you know all the answers, but you know and you trust God on a deep level. And so Jacob gets this deep level of trusting God such that he can go forward, even limping, in a weakened state. He knows his brother can give him a beat down now. But when they see each other face to face, there's reconciliation. You wonder, are they going to embrace in a wrestling match, and will there be violence? And again, like earlier in the book of Genesis, will one brother kill the other? No, they reconcile. And this is so powerful. This, I think, is like the heart of the book of Genesis. It's not only in this story, but where it repeats often. People can choose the way of peace. We can choose that original blessing to use free will as God had intended it, so that we are reconciled in our relationship with God and in our relationship with one another. Or we can choose ego, pride, selfishness, and that resorts to anger, hatred, and violence. And we're not going to go in that direction with Jacob and Esau. There is reconciliation. So Jacob, again, the blessing bearer is the younger child. And, Esau is blessed, and he becomes a great nation too. But the story, the camera, follows Jacob. And he's the one who has 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, I recently did this story, so forgive me if I go on a little bit. You might want to check the videos that are on this channel in the last chapters of Genesis, because the story of Joseph may be, for many people, it's like the culmination. It's the key story. But I think all the stories are really good. It's just that in the story of Joseph, you have prefigured the story of Jesus. You have God working in ways that you can't see at first, but that God will work out His plan and His purpose so that people are preserved and brought back together in right relationship through forgiveness and reconciliation. It's a wonderful story, so I'm not going to get into all of it, but let me hit the highlights. Yes, sibling rivalry, a repeating theme. Did I say it? Yeah, I think I said it. I'll say it again. Yeah, it's that original sin. It's the seed of pride. It's, when brothers get angry. It's for sisters as well. It happens. But it's this sense... Psychology has used the term mimetic desire. If you've ever had children, or if you have been a child, you might remember this. Sometimes one person wants something the other person has. You ever seen a child fight over a toy? And mimetic desire, it comes from the word imitation. We see something and we covet it. It's not so much that the child wants that other thing, the toy that the other child has. Something in the broken human condition makes us want what we don't have, not so much because we want it, but because we see somebody else with it. And either we don't want them to have it, or we just want it for ourselves so that we can have it and they don't. It's a weird thing. Okay, I'm not going to try to riddle us through the brokenness of the human condition. I think you have touch points in your own life to help you understand that. But I wanted you to know it's complex. It's more... It's certainly on a spiritual level. It's also in our bloodstream, so it's on a physiological level. It's more complicated than we can solve. Here's my point. Genesis sets us up as believers to know that we cannot save ourselves. You and I need a Savior. There must be one greater than ourselves who helps us to heal and to cure this broken human condition. So I'm getting a little bit deep into theology. Let me keep it on a summary level here. Joseph, his brothers don't like him. When he's younger, sometimes you're young and you're full of yourself, and it appeared that Joseph was that way. So they started to resent him. It said in one verse in Genesis, they hated him from a long way off. When they saw him a long way off, they hated him. They really hate you when they hate you from a long way off. So they were about to kill him, This, again, escalates to violence, perhaps, but it didn't. They chose to sell him into slavery. So the story of Joseph goes from the pit to the palace. Joseph is thrown in a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery. He goes into Egypt. He serves for a while as a servant in one of the leaders in the nation, and he's falsely accused and he's thrown into prison. A dozen years go by. He's gone from the pit to prison. He's in darkness. He's in chains. He's alone. Yet, he doesn't give up faith. Remember, faith is just don't quit. He trusts God. And it's repeated over and over in this sequence of stories in Genesis. God was with Joseph. So whatever you're going through, trust that God is with you. And so it's a story of God's deliverance from the pit and the prison to the palace. So God raises him up to be second in command of all of Egypt, to preserve life through a difficult famine, not only in Egypt, but around the region where his brothers then in the land of Canaan, they don't have enough food. They have to come to Joseph, and they do, like his dreams had indicated, and they didn't like it, they didn't understand it. The unseen hand of God was at work, and they bow down before Joseph. Not so much to worship him, because they're in a foreign land, they're trying to save their necks. Joseph has this chance then. Think about all that the book of Genesis is about. Free will, an original blessing. Will he use it the way God intends for God's purpose? Or will he lean into ego, selfishness, and pride and say, aha, I have my moment. This is great. I've got my family right where I want them. I can exact my revenge. So often in life we have this choice. Maybe it's not so dramatic. None of you probably ever sought revenge for anything. It's this sense, though, am I going to choose my way? Or will I take the higher way of using the gifts God has given me and this moment for God? So Joseph chooses to forgive his brothers. There's quite a story around it, and there's a lot of suspense, and it's a wonderful story. But the point is, redemption, reconciliation, these avoid violence. These dispel the anger and the resentments. These are a cure for hatred. And forgiveness is a choice that's chosen way before Jesus is even on the scene. Isn't it amazing? Always, from the very beginning, God has intended us to walk in the way of peace and harmony, brotherly love, brotherly and sisterly love. God continues to show us forgiveness is God's way. Division, hatred, anger, and violence, it's not God's way. Choose the ways that make for peace and reconciling with one another. As I close, let me just remind you, God lifts up so many different kinds of people in the Bible, and God lifts up women in a very patriarchal time and culture back then. The names of so many women, sorry, no, not all of them. Mainly it's the men listed in genealogies and so on and so forth in Genesis. But God does lift up the women. So I don't want to get through with this without putting a spotlight there. It's a story of Abraham and Sarah. By the way, Eve, her name literally means mother of all life. God lifts up the wives of these other men, but also the servants. I'm thinking of Hagar and how blessed Hagar is in the scriptures, and how she and her weeping prayer can be a model of devotion for people today, men and women. But I just want to mention God works beyond that family of faith. The king or priest from some other culture already knows the very same God, the one true God that Abraham and Sarah knows, King Melchizedek. And they break bread. It's like a pre-communion scene in the book of Genesis, breaking bread with Abraham in faith. So God is at work in these stories and in these family lines, and God is work outside of that, in the greater world stage as well. So that leads me to my final point. Redemption, reconciliation, forgiveness. This is God's way to make peace and bring people together so that the bigger problems of anger, resentment, hatred, and violence can be averted or solved. And we have this same puzzle with us today. We have this same work before us today. We have this same blessing, opportunity, this same call of God with us today. This is God's way. Reconcile with God and with one another and live in ways that make peace with all people. Because when religion becomes intermingled with hatred and violence, we have all the same problems that happened in Genesis. We have all the same problems that, repeat and kind of perpetuate the cycle of violence and human suffering in the world today. When religion teaches you, hate that group, that category of people, that color, that country, that creed, when we put somebody out there as an object of hatred, religion has failed us, and it's not God's way. So I just want to echo that. I think that's a huge point in the book of Genesis. To say it positively as I wrap up, here's the way I would say it. Genesis teaches every person of faith, whatever your background is, okay? I think the book of Genesis has written large, its headline. God is the God of all people. God blesses all people. God uses outsiders and those who may be overlooked by the world. God even uses Egypt, in this story of Joseph. Remember that. Egypt was a symbol often in the scriptures as enemy of God's people. Yet God goes there with Joseph and is present there to work a way to preserve all life, all different people. So God can work not only in mysterious ways, in ways that we may not expect, in ways that we don't completely understand, to show us that God is the deliverer. God is our deliverer, the deliverer of all people. And with that understanding, we can then, with God's help, choose the way of peace and forgiveness and reconcile with God, and we can reconcile with each other. Because God is the deliverer, this book of Genesis sets us up to truly understand the story of deliverance of God's people in the book of Exodus. So that might be just a little teaser for you to think about another Bible study with yours truly, Jason Dooley. So great to be with you. Thanks for listening. Feel free to contact me with any questions, comments, wisecracks, or criticisms. In the meantime, may God be with you, just as God was with Joseph and all of God's people.